Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up. Our special guest today has been on the show many times, and I'm so delighted to be introducing Kumu Ramsay Taum, and he's here today to talk to us about the relationship between fear and faith. Now, Kumu Ramsay is the founder and president of the Hawaiian-based Life Enhancement Institute of the Pacific, and he speaks all over the world teaching ancient Hawaiian wisdom that is relatable to the issues that we are faced with today. Kumu Ramsay teaches on topics including the 5 pillars of aloha, ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian process of stress release and making things right. Based on Auntie Moana's philosophy and teachings, ho'oponopono is a process that returns balance and rhythm and can be a source of physical, mental, and emotional healing. So let's welcome to the show, Kumu Ramsay.
Thanks, Marianne. Good to be on again.
It's perfect. Oh, my goodness. I'm so glad that we're able to spend this time together, and what a perfect topic, especially to talk about at this time.
Yeah, the world seems to be doing some crazy things, both locally, nationally, and internationally. So, we always talk about having faith, but it can be challenging when you're hearing news of, people doing nutty things, to one another and to our space. So that's when fear comes in. And my observations over the years that they're intimately connected. And so I thought we might talk about that today.
Ooh. Well, I'd love to talk about that. So how is that how is that so connected?
Well, I'm not sure if, there is an old saying or an axiom that says, fear is defined as false expectations appearing real. I'm not sure if you've heard that before.
Yeah.
False expectations appearing real, or even false evidence appearing real. So in order for that to play out, there's an assumption that what you're looking at is indeed real, that it's actual, it's authentic. My observation is that you actually need a high degree of faith in that negative outcome in order to have that much fear that prevents you from moving on or to experiencing something. So, for instance, if someone is afraid of dogs but have never really experienced dogs, and their fear is founded in the idea that whatever I do, the dog is going to bite me, they have so much faith that the dog will bite them. That's manifested as fear. And so they go hand in hand. In the absence of that faith that the dog biting you, you wouldn't experience the fear. And so that's where it's an interesting concept, is that as much as we say we may have faith about things, that very mechanism of faith is fueling the opposite, which is our fears.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I love how you put that, because a lot of times it could, how you're talking about how it could be the absence of faith, and knowing that things are going to work out and the universe has our best interest at heart.
Right. So, I think we talked about it once before, this notion of peace also being the absence of war, where fear is the absence of faith. But in actuality, these opposite sides of the coins are intimately connected. The mechanism that we're using when we're in fear is this high degree of faith. And we keep saying to ourselves, or believing what we've heard, what we've seen, and we've assumed, that this thing is going to happen. And we even begin to take steps to avoid those things, or to move to a new location, or to change our behaviors, all with this false expectation, founded in this faith, this belief that we have now built on. Now, imagine if you could shift and turn the knob the other direction, that same mechanism, and really went to faith and having some belief in the positive experiencing. Now, most people, when we speak about faith, associate it with a belief in something larger than ourselves. This notion of God, this concept of faith, religion, and all those kinds of things. And so the question is, where is my focus? Am I focusing on the upside or the downside? Is the glass half full or the glass half empty? And at that point, it's really a matter of where our focus is. So fear and faith is a matter of focus, what we're focusing on, what we're holding to be true. And interesting enough, the Hawaiian term for faith, the Hawaiian word, is mana'o i'o. And mana'o is this notion of opinion or thought, concept. The word mana is energy. Mana'o is the energy that comes from one's mind, a'o, enlightenment or education, where i'o is the reference to the direction towards God, the creative energy of all things. So mana'o i'o is actually a word for faith. And underlying that is this concept of confidence and trust in something greater than oneself. And so interesting enough, if you're holding your focus on fear, you're really giving that much more power than the other.
It's just where you're putting your attention to.
That's correct.
And so for people, because I think right now a lot of people are in one shape or form in some type of a fear mode. And what are some of the tips that they can use to kind of move themselves into focusing on more of the faith?
Well, I think acknowledging, one, that fear does exist. Fear is a real thing. And it's fortunately we have it because it's a mechanism that allows us to deal with something that should be fearful. For instance, a tiger running around in your house. Mm-hmm. It's one of those responses to deal with danger. It's why we've survived for so long. So the question then is, what danger are you really facing? Is there really danger? Is there enough evidence to demonstrate that what's going to occur is going to occur? Or is this an assumption based on these false beliefs or these false expectations? And I think most people, if they explore what those things are, will actually find that it's unfounded, that it doesn't happen. So the first thing is there real danger here? Am I really at risk? And what evidence do I have for myself? That being said, if you turn to media, if you turn to social media as your primary source of evidence, then unfortunately that's what our media focuses on. That's what sells newspapers. That's what sells, clicks and ads, is fear. So how do you address that? And one way is basically diluting it with things that are founded in faith, is to begin to look towards those things that are upside rather than downside. But the first step is really to determine whether or not are you really in a position of danger, because that's what fear is all about. Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different levels of fear too. It could be like fear that not doing a good job, or just not showing up the way that your community would expect, or different things like that. And so it's interesting how that relates into the faith piece as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if we know that we've done something inappropriate and the fear that we're experiencing is being exposed, then clearly that is an internal thing. There's something that we have done and now are, for all intents and purposes, living a falsehood. And so once again, that false expectation, now made real by our own behaviors, that begins to play. On the other hand, there are times when we may see someone, they look at us and we fear, or we think that they're talking about us. I'm not sure if you've ever been in a group like that. I had that happen once. Well, those people are talking about us. I said, what gives us any credibility for them to be talking about us? We don't know who they are. And they just may be looking past us to something else. Mm-hmm. But I find that oftentimes that fear, that anxiety actually comes from our own behavior. Meaning I would be talking about them if I were them, that type of thing. So it's a reflection of ourselves in many cases, is that someone gossiping about us must be because I'd be gossiping about them. And so it's that notion of the splinter in their eye is the log in my own.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so with this new year that we're now expanding into, and there's so many different things that have gone on and have happened. What are some ways that people can look to bring about just, they recognize that the fear's there, but what are some other ways that they can look to bring about more faith in just their everyday life?
Well, interesting enough, I think when you do things for others, and we've talked about this, really volunteering, reaching out, making yourself available. When you start planting those kinds of seeds, it begins to shift one's focus, creating opportunities for growth, for expansion, for sharing, being in camaraderie, being in community. All of those things, we begin to surround ourselves with people of like mind, preferably those who are moving in a positive direction.
Yeah.
It's too easy, I think, to find others to commiserate with, and or if they're not, we'll take steps to get them to join us to commiserate. Right?
Isn't that true?
Yeah, so we'll begin to share ideas with others to get everybody on the same side of the page with us, because misery, finds comfort in companionship. And so I think similarly, it's who you choose to spend time with, what books you choose to read, what songs or news you listen to.
Yeah.
It's really about focus. And if you find yourself really getting down in the doldrums, turn the channel.
It could be that easy.
And sometimes it is.
Yeah.
After a while, if you keep hearing what you're hearing, they say we are what we eat. And so if we continue to digest the information that I think the media would like us to focus on because of its sensationalism, then we become what we eat. So if mentally, spiritually, and physically we're eating things that are negative, then likely our own responses, our own behavior will begin to demonstrate the nutrition that we're taking in. So sometimes it's as simple, maybe not easy, but as simple as that.
Well, it's interesting. You're always so dead on when it comes to these different topics, and I can look back in my life and think about times when I've been surrounded by people who were just like, the sky's falling, how horrible life is, work is horrible, their life afterwards, they can't stand their husbands or their wives. And so you hear all these things and it makes you realize, gosh, I need to find new people to hang out with.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's enough information around us to prove our point if we want to. So, you can say, you see, I told you so.
Oh, yeah.
But once again, if the spectrum of our view and our lenses are focused and attuned to look for that, that's exactly what we'll find. Other things will go right by us, but because we're not tuned into that, we don't see it.
Yeah.
And I think we may have talked about it the last time, but the minute you buy a new car, everyone has the same car you do. Or next time you buy something and everyone around you has it. Prior to your awareness, it was always there, but now that you're aware of it. So again, it really has a lot to do with focus.
Yeah.
I had an elder, and I would say at this point he was kahuna. He was trained, and he came from a lineal descendancy of wisdom keepers and were trained in these ways. And we were talking one day, and he talked to me about this concept of phobias and fears, and he used the word phobias. But he said there are really only two phobias or two fears that all phobias and fears are rooted in. And he suggested that those two fears come down to the fear of losing and the fear of not having, which I found pretty interesting. He says, regardless of what you think it is you are afraid of, whatever the phobia may be, when you really track it back, it comes down to the fear of losing or the fear of not having. And even those two fears tend to be attached. So, for instance, someone who may be standing on a building, the fear of falling for some people, fear of heights, isn't really so much the fear of falling as much as the fear of jumping. Mm-hmm. The concept that they have the urge to jump. But underlying all that would then be the fear of not having the control, right? Not having enough control and or losing control, and thus jumping. Mm-hmm. So it goes in that relationship. The fear of getting sick is not having my health, losing my health, and then possibly perishing. So at some point in time, when we start shifting the lenses to faith and recognize technically we have everything we need, and all we have to do is ask for it. The next thing is you can't lose what you don't have. So if you have everything, right, now the focus is on how do you maintain it, how do you nurture it, and how do you continue it. And you can't lose it because you always have it. It's always at our disposal. Now, granted, physical things and even people for sometimes move through it. But what is it that we really lost? What did you really have? Or what didn't you have in the first place, right?
Yeah. That
caused this person to walk away and or something else to move away. Once that becomes real, then you can explore it. But I found it interesting, and I would ask listeners to think about it from that standpoint. The next time you're confronted with something we normally translate as fear, ask ourselves, what is it that we're actually afraid of losing? Or was it that we don't have that'll prevent this from occurring?
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a profound way to look at things, because you can really get into a neutral point then, going, well, if I'm not fear of losing it, and not, I don't have the fear of not having it, then it's kind of like, you can be in this place where the fear doesn't really affect you if you are getting to a place where it's like those things aren't as important if we're talking like about material things or just things in general, when you find that inner peace.
Right. And then once you identify it, whatever that might be, then you can begin to take steps to secure it, if it is something that could easily be lost. But let's consider what just occurred in this last year. Thousands of homes were burned. Many homes and even lives were lost. There's a word, lost, losing, in hurricanes and storms. I mean, these are natural events that there's very little that we can manage or control. But I find that many of the people that experience some of those losses, the loss of their homes, their physical belongings, many of them came out of it and said, we still have one another. Those were just things. Mm-hmm. And granted, they may not have said that before the fire or before the hurricane, but when they came out of it, it was that attitude that is helping them to rebuild. As difficult as it may be, my comments are intended to take any of that away. It's difficult. There's no question about it. But their attitude to say that they were just things, they can be replaced. So if that's the case, then really what is it that we're afraid of losing? What is it that we don't think we really have? If I had the ability to do it before, well, maybe I can do it again. So it is really, in that case, all about attitude in many ways.
Well, and on that note too, it's fear is the root of many other, you talk about anger and upset and unable to really communicate well with, people around us. A lot of that has to come from fear.
Absolutely. And I think as much as it is a response to anger or danger, it has a physical response on the body. In order for you to run away from danger, legitimate danger, this fear mechanism is so flight or fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's another level called freeze. So you flight, fight, or freeze. And that's all because of fright.
Mm-hmm.
What are you afraid of? Now, if you don't freeze and get eaten, run over, or smashed, whatever that might be, whatever that physical fear would be, then you can either stand and fight, which is what you need anger for, or you then use the energy to escape and evade, and you need energy for that. And so your body's going to physically respond by juicing you up with adrenaline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you can move quickly. And at that point in time, other bodily functions shut down so that your physical being can concentrate on escaping. And then once you've escaped the harm and you can stand still for a moment, that's when you start to break down. And that's when the nerves fall apart and you start crying and all that kind of stuff. But in the moment, you don't have time to stand
Mm-hmm.
there. You have to react. And then later, all the nerves start falling apart. I'm not sure, but it's happened to me once or twice where you're sitting in the car and someone comes onto the street that you didn't see, and you hit the brake and you just feel this surge of adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
In the moment, you may avoid it, but a second or two later, then all of a sudden you're just flooded with this emotional response. Well, Consider all of that going on, and every single time we're holding a thought in our mind rooted in fear, preparing us for fear, what is that doing to the entire system? What is it doing to our physical being as well as our spiritual being? Because we're connecting to an emotional as well as a physical response. So chemically, stuff is going on. But then we're beginning to tear away at the fabric of hope, and faith, which then means the next time something comes up, we're already leaning more away than to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cumulative. And that's what we have to be careful of, I think. We ought to be. Is that the more we focus on it, the more we bring it to ourselves.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, that would have a physical impact on us. And I think there's enough evidence to show that now. Things like cancers and other things that are musculatory, they're all relating them back to not just what we eat, but what we think.
Mm-hmm. Especially getting into that fear mode where you're so right. It does start to break down the body in some sense. And I know what you're talking about. I've had a couple situations myself where, you have to react quickly or not be here.
Yeah, exactly. And then it requires us to take steps to behave differently.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, going back to the concept of losing or not having, if I have to let go of something and my belief system has required me to hold on to that creates another disconnect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking me to let go of this, but I need this because it's my identity. So that's also part of the losing factor, right?
Yeah.
You may no longer look at me the same way, that concept. My reputation will be lost, or I've led you to believe that I am something, but I'm not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden it goes back to that exposure concept again.
Yeah. It kind of brings you right back to, having to identify with, okay, what are the things that I'm afraid of? And I think it's good to really shine a light on that. So when you sit with it, you're able to go beyond the fear and really evaluate and say, is this something I'm truly afraid of, or is it just something that, I've been programmed to believe? Because as we all come in with programming from our family, and it could be, I knew somebody who her mom was afraid to swim. And so she picked that up from her mother, that fear. It was kind of a generational fear. And so it's interesting when we get into these kind of learned behaviors.
Yeah, it's what we hold on to. And it's that notion, like you just said, someone gave this to me,
Mm-hmm.
grandma, mom, or somebody. And if I let go of it, if I get rid of it, does that mean I no longer appreciate? Am I being disingenuous about it? And at some point in time, I think all of our lives are impacted by these memories that we hold on to. But if we could get to the point where we're thinking, the suitcase that my grandmother gave me or my mother gave me for this part of my journey has suited me well. But I'm now moving on to another part of my journey where the stuff in the suitcase no longer fits. So I'm walking through the desert and they gave me a parka because my life was cold before. And now that it's warming up, thanks for the parka, but I need something new. And so to be able to release that and do so with appreciation and gratitude and realizing that it served you well and now it could serve someone else. But in order for you to move forward, you have to let that go. And I believe that goes with a series of attitudes. The attitudes that we are born with, that we grew up with, are very different than when we're 50, 60, 70, or 80 years old. Mm-hmm. And some of us continue carrying those through. If they serve you well, then fine. But if they don't, then perhaps we need to let go. And therein lies this notion of fear again. Why are we afraid to let it go? What's the attachment? And what prevents us from moving forward if we do?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times people don't even realize that they're holding on to these fears. I mean, I did for a while and had no idea. I was like, wow, okay, I need to take a look at this. This is not serving me. And so I think, as we look at just we've got Christmas just right around the corner in the new year. And so as we're looking at these kind of times where people like to kind of reflect on their lives, it gives them opportunity to look at what is going on.
Yeah, it's funny because in the Makiki season, in the Hawaiian system of Makiki, this is when the Pleiades appears, and Native Hawaiians would look to the Pleiades, the seven sisters, and the term is makali'i, the little eyes. And the reference is, in terms of maka, to look. But in this case, to look in and not necessarily look out. And during this time, this is a time of cleansing the land, the time of preparing for new planting, basically preparing for the new year, the new season. It is also the time of no war. This was a time of where all battles, all fighting ceased. And this was a time of celebration. So we're technically in that period of Makahiki, usually 3 or 4 months between November and March, sometimes December and longer, but those 3 or 4 months. And it is a time to let go. Take all the things that we've done, begin to evaluate what's good, what's useful, what's productive, and what's not. And then to let those go and to move forward. This is Makahiki, the new beginning, the new time. And so you're right. I think as we enter a new year, the tradition of resolutions, whether we keep them or not, right?
Yeah.
It is a time, but I think to commit ourselves to something greater and asking ourselves and doing what I would call self-introspection, to really ask ourselves, what got me here? How did I get here? Where am I and where am I going? And what do I need? What do I have or what I don't have to get me there? And what can I do to make that happen? Nainoa Thompson and the Hokulea, the Hawaiian voyage in canoe, just returned from a voyage around the world, 40,000 plus miles, using ancient navigational techniques, nothing from contemporary time. And they did it without losing anybody, which is a feat unto itself. But it started out 3 years previously. They said, we're going to do this, and they set sail plans and direction. But the voyage could easily have been, and probably was, filled with danger. I mean, you're out in the middle of the sea in a canoe or on a canoe. It's not very big.
Yeah.
You don't do that without planning. You don't do that without faith. Yes, there's a lot of things that they could have been afraid of. And I'm sure that many times, if it wasn't the ocean itself, it was the weather around it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something else that got them through that. And it was their skill, their knowledge, their wisdom, and the leadership, right, that were there. And in our lives, some of us, sometimes we don't think we've got the skill. Sometimes we don't think we've got the right people to follow. If that's the case, then we need to find them. And sometimes that's us. Sometimes we have to step up. So if you're in a room and there's no leaders, then maybe it's you, and that's when you need to step up. And I think we're in that time. I think we're in a time where each of us needs to start looking at what it is that we can bring to our community, what it is that I can do to create the confidence that not only that I need, but those around us. If I can create a safe place within myself, then others seeking safety might find it within me, and hopefully they find it within themselves. And so if that means a safe person, a safe home, a safe community. And that means to have some degree of faith in oneself, your abilities, and those around you.
Yeah, it allows us, when we get ourselves into a place where we have that inner strength and that inner feeling of inner peace and safety, we're able to, show people the way on how they can develop that for themselves if they don't have any idea how to do it. And, when I started, I had no clue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how did that start for you? I mean, what was it that actually got you to that place where you could do what you're doing?
It was work.
Mm-hmm.
But it was joyous work. I dived into just took a deep dive into my my own practice, my own spirituality
Mm-hmm.
practice, and
Mm-hmm.
I really listened to my inner core on
Mm-hmm.
what resonated and what didn't. But it was a lot of trial and error, and worked with some teachers that were great and some that were not so great. And so, you just kind of find your way, but you get to a place where you really know who it is that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter what's going on in the world around you. That's something that doesn't get really shaken to the core at all, because for me, it was really kind of developing a deeper connection to God and having
Mm-hmm.
that connection where I feel like I'm talking to him like an old friend or a father.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting enough, it comes back to where we started, doesn't it?
Yeah,
this
sure
notion
does.
of faith, right? Is knowing that internal compass is there. So regardless of where you may be, you may not know where you are, but you certainly aren't lost. Not when you have that internal compass, and or connection to a navigator that can always get you to where you need to be. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we choose destinations that aren't the right place for us. But if we can place our faith in that greater navigator, then it just happens to be one of the destinations on the path to the eventual one, mm-hmm. right? So rather than looking at every stop as the final stop, mm-hmm. just one along the journey.
That's so true.
It's knowing that, having that faith, right? Mm-hmm. Interesting enough, the complementary term to faith is hope. And in Hawaiian, once again, the hope is the word mana'olana, while the word for faith was mana'o'io. So when you look at the two words, once again, the first word, mana'o, it's really about an opinion. What's your opinion? And what is your opinion based on? What is your opinion rooted in? So mana'o'io is an opinion, a thought, or belief rooted in God. Mana'o'io. Whereas mana'olana, this notion of hope, is an opinion or thought, belief that is buoyant, one that lifts, one that floats. Lana is this notion of buoyancy, of rising up. And so whenever things are down, we talked about briefly, we look up. And so mana'olana is this notion of hope. So mana'o'i'o, mana'olana. It is with faith and hope that we look to the future. And hope is that one thing that lifts us from the places of difficulty and challenge. And when you have mana'o'i'o to support you, the faith, trust, and then, of course, hope. So it's a very powerful concept when you start breaking it down in those terms.
I just love the Hawaiian language. It to me, it's so beautiful in the words that are spoken and the meaning. It's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I love it.
Yeah, and I turn to it regularly, not to use it in the colloquial sense, but to understand that deeper, those principles behind it. Because the third concept along with that, faith, hope, and love, right? That's that notion of aloha. That's also rooted in a connection to the divine, to God. The aloha, the which is the divine spirit, the aloha or the alo, the connection, and that spiritual breath. And as long as you're breathing, you're connected. So as long as you're breathing, you should have hope and you should have faith because you're gifted with that breath. And in that breath is the connection to God. So faith, hope, and love. Mana'o'i'o, mana'olana, and aloha. But there is a last one that's called mana'o'ike. Mana'o'ike. Ike is wisdom. An opinion, thought, or belief that is founded and rooted in wisdom, rather than in assumptions. And so I would offer that anytime we're confronted with something that is creating a fear response, is to really ask ourselves, is this true? What's the truth behind this? And then to do the research in it. And to ask those, as you suggested earlier, who do know. And to really begin to challenge the assumptions and perhaps the false beliefs that far too often we rely on for guidance in the absence of ike, in the absence of wisdom. Mana'o ike. And so many of the kupuna that the elders, again, that I was fortunate to be mentored by, really tended to operate from this place. They got to a point in their lives where they realized that they had everything they needed, that whatever they didn't need or lost over time was obviously something they didn't need. So no sense holding on to it.
Yeah.
And where they were at their transitions is they began to realize that they were now at a point where the ike, the wisdom that they had been seeking, right, was always a part of them. They created that. They were part of that. And it was always in them. And so therefore this notion of always looking outside, looking for the next thing, it's really just letting it be, and finding the faith, the hope, and the love to guide us to get us there, to do that. So it was a wonderful thing spending time with these individuals.
Oh. I can see how enlightening it is because with, first of all, the Hawaiian people are so spiritual. The spiritual practice that they have is to me just an astounding practice. And when you listen to the words and start to really understand what's being said, I mean, it's a real deep connection to everything. And I think that's what a lot of people want to develop. I hear this a lot where people are like, how can I be more spiritual? How can I bring more spirituality in my life? I want to have a closer connection to God, or I want to be able to, just be more intuitive, whatever it is that they're looking for. That usually kind of falls along that line. And what they're asking for is really to have that deep connection within themselves and within God.
Well, I think it is so true. I have the good fortune of living in paradise.
Yes, you do.
And although I drive across the freeway like everyone else, we also have the opportunity to look to the right, and I'm looking at the expansiveness of the Pacific Ocean. And then I look to the left and I'm looking at these beautiful, tropical mountains, blue skies with easterly trades that, it could be 90, but it feels like it's 80 or 75. Mm-hmm. So there's really not much to complain about. But I also recognize that when we're elsewhere in the city, even downtown Honolulu, just that difference, a 1 mile makes, that you're now in a place that is man-made and artificial.
Yeah.
So I think what people are seeking out in many ways is this connection back to nature. And not so much environmental nature, but what is natural within ourselves. And that can be difficult to do when you're surrounded by, or when we surround ourselves by, things that are artificial. So when you're in a city, you're basically surrounded by the artifices mm-hmm. of cement and steel and all those. And as wonderful they are, I love architecture. I'm a closet architect. Mm-hmm. But the architecture, the constructs of nature, when you go into the forest and you see what it has created, it's just fascinating. How can you not be moved by that? So I think in many ways that spirituality is reconnecting to natural time, natural spaces, rather than always being surrounded by artificial ones. And we're fortunate that we can bring in natural, things, whether it's on your iPad, you can put it up on the screen, but it's not mm-hmm. it's not quite the same. So I think finding ways to get back into nature, or bringing nature into your home, whether it's a potted plant or an animal, I believe those things help us connect back to the root of the creative energy that created that plant and or the animal, which of course created us. And I think that's where spirituality begins. So you don't have to live in the woods, but certainly anytime you can get out there, that's a good idea.
Yeah, anytime you can be in nature and just away from, for me at least, from like the city and everything that's man-made. I mean, it brings such a peace and refreshing, I think, to the body. You can feel like your soul's being refreshed as you go for a hike.
Yeah, and I may have mentioned it once before, but I turned back again to the principles and concepts of our elders. Mm-hmm. The term for medicine is la'au, the Hawaiian word for la'au, and the word for plants or anything of wood or of growth is called lau, L-A-U. And la'au or lau, referring to those things, is again the reflection of the acknowledgement of La, the sun, and or the energy of God. Right? So la'au is when the sun's energy has been transferred to the leaf by photosynthesis, scientifically, mm-hmm. right? That leaf or plant has captured that life-giving energy from the sun, which energizes everything on our planet, and therefore holds it there, and it is captured now in that plant. Now, the term that we use to identify ourselves is au, A-U. A, the fire god, heat energy, and U, the spirit of man. Combined together, au means me, I, the unification between the divine and the human. Mm-hmm. La'au then is when I can take that plant and consume it, and therefore transfer the energy of God and life from that plant into my body. Because I can't do that naturally, right? So la'au lapa'au is the practice of medicine or healing or bringing balance back to a system that is out of balance. And just the word once again tells you, if you're looking for energy, you're looking for spirit, look to the plants. Right? And so it comes full circle, right? Whether you're sitting among them or consuming them, mm-hmm. what you're really doing is you're being in the presence of the divine energy that has been captured in that thing called lau, the woods, the plants, the vegetables, as well as the animals. So it's really a powerful thing when you think about it.
Oh, it's so beautiful because it connects everything the way that it's intended to be connected. You know, if we look at everything coming from God or the divine, I mean, it has you really view things in a different way than someone just tromping through grass or trudging up a hill. You know, you're more. I would think, at least in my practice, I'm more mindful of everything that's around me.
Well, with the pharmaceutical industry we have today, we have distilled or extracted the things from nature and put them into pills, into capsules, into bottles, and now they're over the counter. So where it took us time, and as you said, mindfulness, it took intention and intent to leave one's home to go out to the woods, right? To gather your herbs. Whereas now you can just go to the medicine cabinet, pull out something, and take 2 pills, call me in the morning. But in the process of extracting that, we also have now developed all these side effects, which, interesting enough, did not exist when we were using natural herbs. For some reason, in her wisdom, God has created plants and things to be the buffers. So while you may take a particular leaf or particular part of the plant to utilize it, the ingredient that pharmaceuticals have extracted as the prime ingredient was actually buffered by the rest of the leaf or the rest of the plant. And so it was a whole food. It was something you could just eat, you could take with the right, the proper treatment, of course, and the proper guidance from a healer. But once again, we've kind of sidestepped, nature's wisdom and replaced it with our own, which has in many ways created some of the disconnects that we have today, and therefore something truly to be fearful of, right? When we're no longer connected in that faith with that thing that was there all along, and replaced it with their own, and I think in many cases we're beginning to experience the folly of that. So you're right. How do we return to that spirituality, which is really how do we return to that connection? And this may be one of them, is acknowledging the power and the value of being in nature, in natural time versus artificial time.
What other things would you suggest our listeners do if they're wanting to just develop a deeper connection with the divine?
One, I think, is asking and then listening. They say that prayer is a concept of sending out one's request. Well, meditation is the part of receiving. And there's a tendency for us to always send messages and never wait for their return. And so sometimes sitting quietly and listening, you call it meditation, call it what you want. But I think that's the part. And I think once you start to hear and start to listen, that starts to build a relationship. And the thing is acknowledging that God is present, always present. And we forget that. And sometimes it's as simple as sitting and asking and then listening. That's the first step. We can seek out gurus, we can seek out others to help us. But at the end of the day, those of us who have been supported by others will always say, at the end of the day, they helped us find ourselves. Any physician or doctor will tell you if they're any worth their weight in gold or salt. They'll tell you at some point in time they're assisting the person in healing themselves, healing their bodies. So it's an inside job. So before we start looking outside, always start looking inside. Because the urge is coming from within. The urge isn't coming from without. And therefore, it needs to be fed within rather than from without. So I would say fight the urge to go out, unless going out allows you to go in, which means go to find a spot outside of your natural environment, your normal environment, that allows you to be quiet enough to go in and to find that place of calm and quiet. In Hawaiian, we call that pu'uonua, the place of refuge, a place of sanctuary. And it's one that we carry around with us all the time. We just need to find a way to get there. So I would encourage people just that, even in the busiest place that you find yourself, you can always find a place to go in.
And have that inner peace and work on that, because it's a journey. It's, for me, it's felt like every time, it's like a rose. Every time a petal is unfolds, there's a new petal that's unfolding. So it's a continuous journey.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of times it has to do with our expectations. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen overnight. I'm sitting here looking out a window, and I've now been visiting this spot, this home, for nearly 27 years. And I'm looking at a forest that was at one time just these tiny trees and saplings, if you would. And I'm now looking at a full-grown forest behind the house. How did that happen? Where'd the time go? But as I'm sitting and looking at it, I think, wow, time. It doesn't happen overnight. And so when we're starting to feel the urge to connect, give ourselves time. Find the time to sit. Find the time to meditate, to pray. But it does take time. I was telling a student the other day, I said, if I want papayas tomorrow and I plant the seeds tonight, am I expecting too much from the papaya tomorrow? Yeah.
That could be the case.
Right. So we don't expect that from other things, and yet we expect that from ourselves. He said, now that I made the commitment, I want it instant. I got instant coffee, instant oatmeal. We live in the world of instant. Mm-hmm. Well, these things like this aren't so instant, And so it does take intention, but we have to give it time. It also takes patience. And there again, it comes back to faith, hope, and love in a season, that we're all in at this time. So I hope that helps, get somebody to that point of spirituality that they're looking for.
I think it will. I mean, it's such a good place to start with. And a lot of times people don't even know where to begin. And at least that gives people a good starting point to go, gosh, okay, maybe it's time I go connect with nature and start to meditate and do something that I probably never do, and is ask something for myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think also looking at those people who seem to have it, and what are they doing differently? What do they do? But I would caution, it isn't your usual suspects. It's not necessarily the member of the clergy. It's not necessarily the person who is carrying the title of religious or spiritual leader. Spiritualism may be less about those practices as it is about their daily behaviors. Not so much the scholarly or scholarly practices, but the ones where someone is just every day doing something for someone else without expectation of return. They're doing it from their heart. They're doing it with spirit. That's spirituality. And sometimes our definition of spirituality tends to fall too close to the definitions of religious practice. And so I would caution that people not get caught up in that, as much as there are dogmas that support our behaviors, because they provide us with ritual and practice, technique, if you would. There is something else about the authenticity in the absence of that. Nature's not operating. Nature's not operating from those dogmas. It just is. It's just being. It's being that authentic self. And so I would offer, when you see that in someone else, what is it? What is it that they're doing? And sometimes it's just being present. Being open, being respectful.
So I'm sure you've got a lot of people following you around watching what you're doing, right?
So that's what the crowd is.
Like, what is he doing over there? But that's so true, because usually it's interesting. The best teachers I've ever come across in my lifetime aren't the ones on the stage. You know,
Right.
it's not that they'll do workshops and what have you, but you know, it's not somebody who you would, they're not really being very flamboyant about that connection, because it's something that they know that they just have. You know, it's just like, and of course, I've developed this, and this is who I am.
Yeah, and I think there's a term for that, and that's called mastery. Right? When we really look at the masters, they're really not the ones that are out there doing that. In the martial arts, I've been training since I was a kid. The masters that I've met are usually the guys sitting in the corner, you know, having a cup of coffee, and they're not out on the floor trying to, you know, knock it up with everybody. And they not only have mastered their art, they've mastered their lives. You know, they got degrees in this, they got certifications in that, they've accomplished, but they're not holding these high political titles and all kinds of stuff, but they've mastered their lives. And so they're okay with that. That's the quiet guy. So I caution my students is be careful. It's not the guy on the mat you have to worry about. It's the guy sitting in the corner. That's the master. He's sitting there watching it. Yeah. Because he understands who he is or she is and what she's doing. And it is in that calm, quiet place of mastery. Morna Simeona, and I mentioned to her before, to you, she was the teacher for Ho'oponopono, my kupuna. Yeah. And she had gotten to the point where she was so comfortable with herself that she could sit for hours. I remember traveling with her, and she'd be sitting there completely silent, extremely comfortable, so comfortable she made me uncomfortable. You know, it's like you feel you have to say something. It's okay, you know, I have to break the silence because. But she was always in that space, always in that moment. And when she needed to respond, she would respond by choice, by intention, very present. But other than that, you would never know she was there. Right? And she was doing exactly what she intended to do, was to be there, be present. Yeah, minding her own business. That's true mastery, right? So
that is true mastery, because it's so easy to get caught up in everything, you know, and especially with everyone, you know, everyone around you is like, well, what's this person doing? And you know, how come they're doing this when they should be doing that? You know? Exactly.
Yeah. Back to expectations. Well, Marianne, I hope this is helpful, and you know, this is always so wonderful.
It is, and you know,
communicating,
I can't believe that we've come to the end of our time. It's always such a joy to spend this time with you, and again, where can our listeners visit your website? What website do you have?
Yeah, Life Enhancement Institute is actually under ramsaytaum.com. So for some reason we haven't been able to link the two, but if you go to ramsaytaum.com, that is actually my page, and it has the activities of the Life Enhancement Institute of the Pacific. And they can find me there, or they can find me on Facebook, Kumu Ramsay, or Ramsay Taum. And there are a number of other links on YouTube now where presentations I've done, and people have been posting those, so they can find that there too.
Well, I know that people also take advantage of your leadership coaching that you do, because you're, in my regards, I think you're a very profound leader, and you speak all over the place. So, you know, Ramsay, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful 2018.
Well, thank you, Kumu Ramsay. I'd like to wish you a very happy 2018 as well. And to all of those listening, you've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.